Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Big Idea Podcast. My name is Eric Bramlett, and I am joined by Tammy Melchien. Tammy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks.
All right, glad you're here. Just by way of an apology in advance, I'm not yet adjusted to the Central Time Zone.
So you're gonna just like fall
It's like
over
3
at
in the
some
morning right now for me. So yeah, if I just fall over or if I fall asleep, if I Kim Hammond this, just push through.
Okay, I will.
Okay.
I'll kick you while you're on the ground.
This is a little bit of a different scenario here because we are breaking up some of our series in the way in which we brainstorm them because we've got a 2-part series and then we've got a 5-part series. And so the meeting that we're preparing people for here is the first 2 weeks of Ready Set, the only weeks of Ready Set, and then the first 2 weeks of the Transform series, which includes Show Up Sunday and gets us to, but doesn't include, Celebration Generosity and the rest of the Transform series. So we'll come back at a different time with a different podcast setting to be able to lay out those weeks. But for now, let's start by talking about Ready Set. This is the very first weekend in September. We're getting geared up for Show Up Sunday, and we've got a 2-week series. It sounds very familiar, perhaps, to community brainstormers. But where are we headed with this series, Ready, Set, Tammy?
Okay, well, similar to how we did last year, I mean, really what we want to generate people to do is invite people, include people, and be praying for Show Up Sunday. So it's a short 2-week series that is going to prepare us for that. The first week we'll be talking about prayer, and the second week we'll be talking about inviting. That's the big picture.
That's the big picture. All right. And let's go ahead and just dive right in, and let's talk about the first week, which we're calling Pray. So where are we headed in particular with Ready, Set, week 1? Pray.
With pray. Well, there's an Oswald Chambers quote that I want to read for you because I think this says a little bit of how the direction is going to go. And he says this: to say that prayer changes things is not as close to the truth as saying prayer changes me and then I change things. And as we look at this week, we want to talk about how, as we're challenging people to pray for those that they need to invite and include, really, I mean, we don't pray just so that something happens in their life. I mean, we need prayer because it changes us. And, we're going to work our way through the Lord's Prayer and talk about how, when Jesus gave that as a model to pray, how really each line in that prayer changes, is about praying for change in ourselves as well. And so even when we get to the challenge in this week, we're still going to have a challenge of here are the 3 or here are the 5 people that I want to invite to this. But even on the card, we've talked about the response card saying me and blank, because as you begin to pray for those people, it hopefully will change you in that you are relating to them differently, you're thinking about them differently, and hopefully motivated to invite them, something that you might not be thinking about doing if you weren't praying. So it has a little bit of a, yes, we're still praying for people we want to invite, but we're doing this so that we change to become the inviters that God wants us to be.
Gotcha. And then talk through a little bit then how the Lord's Prayer reflects how prayer actually does change us.
Sure. Well, when you think of the first line, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I mean, in one sense, even just that first line of the prayer focuses on God, and it reminds us of that he's the hallowed one, not us. And so kind of puts him in his right place and gives us perspective of that. If you move on, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. That's about, focusing on his priorities and how I change my focus from all the stuff that I'm thinking about to focus on him. Give us this day our daily bread, reminds us of our dependence on God. Even when you get to right past the Lord's Prayer, when he says, ask and it'll be given to you, seek and it'll be seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open to you. I mean, those are all very action-oriented words that move us to action. And so, all of that, as you see those lines, you can look at that and say, okay, yeah, I'm asking God to do certain things, but I'm also hopefully being changed.
Right, changed as a result, changed
Yeah,
in the
in
process.
myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's another scene that I mentioned in the map that if you want to go look it up in the movie Shadowlands, where C.S. Lewis character played
Anthony
Hopkins.
yeah.
That's right, plays it. And I love that scene because someone asked him something about why do you pray? It doesn't change God, and he comes back and says, I pray because I need to pray.
Yeah.
Because it's not so much that it changes God as it changes me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what we're going for with this first week.
No, it's a great way to set the tone, I think, from the very beginning. And perhaps what it means to be ready. All right, so week 2 then, we're going to come and see. Or we're going to encourage others to come and see.
Yeah.
So talk about the week 2, where we're headed with this in terms of if week 1 has got the Lord's Prayer, where are we headed scripture-wise for week 2?
Sure. The week 2 is going to be a very narrative, story-based week where we're actually going to look at 3 stories very briefly in the Gospels where someone has an encounter with Jesus, and you see their response is to say to others, "Come and see," or their response is to take it to others. So you start with Philip and Nathaniel, and Philip tells. Philip basically has this encounter with Jesus, and he goes to Nathaniel and says, "Come and see." Or you have the woman at the well who Jesus has this transformative interaction with her, and she runs back to town and says to everyone, "Come and see the man that I see." The third one's a little bit different, but we're going to fudge it in there. Where Jesus...
Come and see that I don't have any demons left in me.
Yes, where Jesus heals a guy that was demon-possessed, and the guy wants to go with Jesus, but Jesus sends him back to his hometown where it says he goes around and tells everyone...
Yes. Right.
What Jesus did. So the word
10
come and
different cities, by the way.
Come and see doesn't necessarily appear in that third story, but I think the same concept
does. Completely inferred.
Yes. But the reason that we picked those 2 was because we have a lot of hesitation sometimes in inviting. Sometimes we hesitate because we don't think we know enough, or we hesitate because we're worried about being rejected, or we... I'm trying to remember what the third hesitation is we went with in this, but basically we have these stories paralleling because, the first one, when we think, I don't know enough, I don't know how to answer their questions. Mm-hmm. Well, Nathaniel asks a question of Philip, and Philip doesn't even attempt to answer it. Instead, he just says, "Come and see for yourself."
Right.
And the woman at the well, if anybody had the potential to be rejected, it was her.
Sure.
And she doesn't care, and she says, "Come and see."
Right.
And so we look at those things and basically just say, in the third one, in some senses, his life was changed.
Yeah, he went from being a naked, crazy man
yeah.
to being dressed and back to his normal self. What
Yeah.
they were seeing was the person they remembered.
Yeah, yeah. And so, really, basically what we're challenging people to in this one is if your life has been impacted by what God has done in you through, that encounter that you've had with Jesus by being a part here at this community here at Community Christian Church, all we're asking you to do in inviting people is ask them to come and see. Mm-hmm. Come and see on Show Up Sunday.
Yep.
And, we're going to put our best promise out there that we're going to create an inviting, welcoming experience for them as we try to do every week, but we're going to go over top with that on Show Up Sunday.
Yeah, and I would say I'd go ahead and put this in here now as you're taking this in and working on brainstorm materials. We are very, very interested in trying to find a story that's specific to last year's Show Up Sunday, and it has 2 components. One, we're looking for a story of someone. And I'm going to let you describe it. Yeah, because I almost have it, but it's still 3 in the morning. So go for it.
What we want to do is we want to have a 2-part story. We feel like this will be the key to this moment. So we need a great story where part 1 is someone that's actually been around community for a while, that they can speak to how their life has changed by being a part of this community. And so you're not necessarily going to realize that they've been around for a while, but when they, near the beginning of the message, they're going to describe what's happened in their life. And then when we get to part 2, basically they're going to be saying, because of what I experienced last year when we did Show Up Sunday, I really wanted my friend Eric to experience this too. And we hope to pan out, and there you see Eric sitting next to it. And we want Eric to be a person that they invited to Show Up Sunday who came last year when we did Show Up Sunday for the first time. And then that person is going to talk about the difference that this is, being a part of community has made in their life over this past year. So we're really looking for a killer story that I think will drive that home here. And hopefully that's good incentive to you to look at your own campus, because if you could get that story filmed with one of your own attenders, it's going to be just even that much more effective for your campus.
Yeah. So begin the process of investigating for those stories, because it's a specific need, and there are variables involved. But being able to find that person who can say, yeah, I was here last year at Show Up Sunday and I found my way back to God, or I got baptized, but then being able to point to it. I think it's pretty rare, actually, that we have we've only done, this will be our second Show Up Sunday. So we don't really know what that feels like. We have a pretty good idea of how someone might describe coming to their first service.
Yeah.
Kind of regardless. Yeah. But I think it'll be really interesting to get someone's take on something that they know is called Show Up Sunday.
Yeah.
Being there for the first time and what their experience was like.
Yep.
All right, so that's out there. Make sure that you are thinking about that, touching base, arts director, campus pastor, entire staff there. Try to find that story. We definitely, it would be a great problem to have if we had 3 or 4 of those stories that we had to try to choose one. So please don't make us hunt it down. Find it for us. Thank you. All right, so now we move into Show Up Sunday. Show Up Sunday, week 1 of Transform. And so we are moving into a different look and feel, different style, a new series. This is a 5-week series that includes Celebration Generosity in week 3 as we transform the world. But like I said, we're really going to focus our conversation today on the first 2 weeks. But Tammy, talk to us a little bit about where this overall series is headed.
Yeah, the overall series is based on the series theme verse is Romans 12:2 that says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And this idea that you're either going to conform or you're going to be transformed. And by default, all of us conform. All of us just kind of conform to what is the cultural norms, the social norms, whatever the norms are. You're generally just going to conform to that unless you intentionally put yourself in a place to be transformed. And so throughout the series, we're going to look at some key areas of our lives and challenge one another to make intentional choices to choose the path of transformation. Kind of looking at, God doesn't want us to be conformist. He wants us to be non-conformist. And so we're going to look at, the first week we're really going to talk about our relationship with God, like just transforming my whole life. The second week, we're going to talk about transforming relationships. Then the ones that we're not going to talk about today, we get into Celebration Generosity, which is transforming our world. We're going to get into transforming my physical health. And we're going to talk about transforming my mind, my thoughts.
That's good. I like that. So let's go ahead and dive into week 1. And this will be Show Up Sunday. Boom, boom, boom. So we're there. Everyone has shown up. It's been amazing, and we're going to transform everyone's life right off the bat.
Okay.
All right, so what do we do?
Well, interesting. Obviously, we want this message to have a lot to do about finding your way back to God. And so if you're not aware, it says on the map, too, we actually are adapting this series from a very powerful series that Saddleback did that was called Transformed. And so as we looked at what they did with this first week, obviously we want it to be about finding your way back to God. But when we looked at they did it about the prodigal son, which we were like, yeah, we're not going to do the prodigal son, but we want all that idea in that
and just
as well.
To say it out loud, because for 5 weeks we focused on the prodigal son in the Finding Your Way Back to God series.
Yes.
It was really good.
Which was a little too recent, though, to want to revisit it again. But as we thought about it, we thought, gosh, though, the message of that is really what we want to communicate. So And we also thought, even though we don't want to go back to the prodigal son and do the same thing, we also don't want to create a whole different pattern for finding your way back to God than the way that we've been talking about. So what we've decided is we are gonna this is gonna be a finding your way back to God message, and we are gonna use the 5 awakenings that we talked about during the Find Your Way Back to God series: awakening to longing, to regret, to help, to love, and to life. But the content around those is going to be all new and different. So we're going to talk about them in different ways. We're going to use different illustrations. We're going to use different scripture texts.
And obviously, we're moving in a path where we're hitting each of those awakenings all in one week,
Yes.
as opposed to separating them
Yes.
into 5 different weeks. So it becomes an overview of those awakenings in a way.
Yeah.
Which I really like, because I think since we've only thought about those awakenings in the context of the prodigal son, I think it's interesting to think about the principles of these awakenings being true, kind of regardless of whether or not it's following the narrative of the prodigal son or not.
Yeah. And I like this line. This was, actually from Rick Warren. The further you get away from God, the more you will conform. The closer you get to God, the more your life will transform. And so again, the conformity default is for us to drift away from God. And so, in order to be transformed, we need to find our way back. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a pretty powerful message, especially for all the new attenders that are coming on that day. One of the things, we haven't talked about this yet, but one of the things I think we might consider, and maybe this is just more in campus pastor moments leading up to the series, is I think it could also instill confidence in our current attenders during the Ready Set series to say,
this is going to be good stuff.
This is going to be good, the stuff we experienced during the Finding Your Way Back to God series.
Right, yeah.
That's the type of message that you're going to hear. And so all of those friends, those neighbors, those family members that you long to see find their way back to God, this is the message you want to bring them to.
Yeah, and if they're kicking themselves for not bringing enough people or not inviting enough people to the Finding Your Way Back to God series, it's like, this is your chance to maybe mend some of those things. There's also an opportunity here that, while we don't necessarily know exactly how this is going to play out campus to campus, but we want to mention it in this moment. And that's the idea that this could be a springboard for some middle-sized groups or some small group in terms of tracking along with the Finding Your Way Back to God series as a small group curriculum. Is there anything you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think it'd be a great thing for campuses to consider possibly having 6-week long or 5 or 6 week, 5 week long, 5 week long new attender groups that were based on the Finding Your Way Back to God curriculum, because the DVD curriculum just came out, the small group leader, so we could get that into your hands. And, I think it could be pretty powerful during the first couple weeks of the series to be promoting that 5-week group. And then, in October, you launch it. It's done before Thanksgiving, but it gives you a chance to really walk all these new attenders through Finding Your Way Back to God, build some relationships, and then hopefully maybe once you get through the holidays, you can launch some new groups with them. I think it could be an effective strategy to think about that.
Very good. While also remembering that we're promoting the crap out of Celebration Generosity, too.
Yes.
But,
somehow.
But that is a perhaps sidebar issue.
We'll put the crap over there for right now.
That'll be crap. We'll figure it out. All right, week 2 then. We've said show up Sunday was week 1. We said come back next week. You won't want to regret it, because we are talking about transforming our relationships, and who needs help with that? I do. We all do. So come back next week. Great opportunity to bring people back. So when they come back, what will they experience as we're talking about transforming our relationships?
Okay. Well, we're gonna look back to the Genesis story of Adam and Eve screwing things up.
Way to go.
And how that is just reflective of how we let fear damage our relationships. And so in this big idea, we're gonna address 3 common prevalent fears that we see in that story of Adam and Eve that are also the fears that are a lot of times destroying our relationships now. And so we're gonna talk about the fear of exposure. This is this fear that if you really saw me or you really knew me, or this fear of this ugliness that we see in ourselves, the fear of disapproval, and then the fear of not having control. And it'll challenge us to look at how we actually, maybe not even realizing that fear is underneath it, but how we actually live that out, in anywhere from our closest relationships with family and friends to even sometimes I think about the things that we see people posting on Facebook and stuff like that of this. It was interesting as I read through some of this stuff, talked about a secure person doesn't have to have their way all the time, and it doesn't have to be controlling about what's being said or get defensive, and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, oh, we could hit some nerves.
Yeah.
with some of that.
I just don't know if you see enough of that in Facebook
Yeah,
posts.
I don't know. But we're not going to leave everyone afraid. We're going to talk about the antidote to fear.
Mm-hmm.
And the antidote to fear is love. And that's where we look at 1 John 4:16 and 18, where has that phrase in there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear. And so we're going to basically talk about how wherever God's love is, you don't have to be afraid. And so the question becomes, okay, well, how do we get God's love then into our relationships?
Mm-hmm.
How do we bring that love so that we can stop being afraid?
Nice.
And our relationships can be transformed.
All right, I dig that.
So we're going to fix everything in one.
Yeah, I mean, this is like 2 weeks of major fixing going on. That's good. That is really good news. All right, well, like I said, those are the first 2 weeks of these series. So from a look and feel standpoint, we should be well on our way and be brainstorming about those kind of things. Mm-hmm. And then we will come back to you at a later time and give you the vision and details behind the remainder of the series for Transform. So we'll leave you on a cliffhanger. This is kind of part one, and to be continued. So for the Big Idea Podcast, my name is Eric Bramlett, and this is Tammy Melchien, and we are saying so long, everybody.
See ya.